I would like to welcome you all and introduce our panel for today and our moderator, Tawanda.
Eric, thank you. And I also want to start off by saying thank you to the Future of Work Initiative for putting on this very exciting conference on accelerating AI and data automation. The topic of our panel today is building a data culture in healthcare and beyond. I will be the moderator. My name is Tawanda Chitapa. I'm a system director for business intelligence, clinical value, and healthcare analytics at Norton Healthcare right here in Louisville, Kentucky. In that role, I provide oversight of all our people, processes, and technology that help the organization glean insight into our clinical and business functions to drive value across the enterprise. I'm joined today by an esteemed panel. I will ask Jeremy, Scott, and Tom to introduce themselves briefly in that order. So, Jeremy.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Willis. I am the Director of Data Services at Advanced Business Solutions. Advanced Business Solutions, we're celebrating 25 years of business. We're a company providing managed IT support, cybersecurity, consulting, and data services. I lead our data services team, and we're finding ourselves mostly helping customers who are just starting their data journey. These companies are realizing the power of data they already have and don't have a resource dedicated to reporting within the company. In many cases, they're using canned reports within applications, but have no way to combine data to get a better picture of their organization. We typically come in, get access to the data, begin mapping data, or creating a data dictionary and start creating reports. Our ultimate goal is to get clients started on the data journey and help them move from descriptive to prescriptive and predictive analytics. And in addition to those companies just starting, we're also helping other customers like Scott and Mercy Hospital with more advanced steps like creating their data lake or cross-application reporting.
All right, Scott. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, great. Yeah, hey Jeremy, how you doing? And Tawanda, thank you. I'm Scott Alderman. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Mercy, Iowa City. And to Jeremy's point, our journey here, and by the way, throughout my career as an IT leader in healthcare, this has been certainly a topic that has come up many times, a strategy that many times has been put together. It has tremendous value, and it was no different than when I arrived here at Mercy, Iowa City. I came from the last place I worked in Denver at another healthcare company that was doing something very similar. But anyway, we've actually started that journey, and I've already started seeing tremendous value around it. However, some of the things like what we'll talk about today is, what's been some of those challenges and what are some of the things we do to overcome it. But just so that everybody knows, I am a University of Louisville alumni. So I've actually lived in Kentucky 14 years. I worked in Louisville for many of those 14 years. So got some good roots there. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Tom, please introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Tom Lawry. I'm the National Director for Artificial Intelligence for Health and Life Sciences at Microsoft. What that really means is I serve as a strategic advisor to our key, largest, and best healthcare clients, which include providers, payers, and life science. So much of my advising has something to do with technology, but oftentimes really driving value at scale in any organization comes down to the leadership skills and challenges of understanding what AI is, how to apply it, and a big part of that is looking at what you do to align your workforce, whether it's culture or whether it's skilling, which I'm sure we're going to talk more about.
Thank you, folks. So those are our panelists. To begin with, I just want to frame the conversation why we're talking about a data-driven culture. I think healthcare organizations today are constantly being challenged to balance the value equation, right? That means trying to improve quality, service, and improve access as well, all while trying to lower cost. And data is being looked at as being a big part, front and center of those solutions. So based on our topic today, a lot of people are always throwing out the term data-driven. But what does it mean? What does it look like in practice? And why is that important? I'd like to start off with Tom, if you can take that one, and then I'll ask some of the folks to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So first of all, factoid in healthcare, health and medical information as of one report in last year is doubling every 73 days. So first of all, imagine you are the best trained physician coming out of the best residency, and you're starting your practice today knowing a couple of months from now there will be twice as much information to deal with and sort through to be an even better physician or nurse or whatever. So we start with the premise of data is either the enemy because you've got too much, and I often see executives wringing their hands about the explosion of data. But those who are having foresight look at that as a great opportunity. And it starts with understanding the value of data, which is applied in making measurable decisions on anything from clinical decision to managing things like rev cycle. The second part of that is technology can provide a lot of things. Machine learning can help us do a lot of things like correlations on how to predict things. But a data-driven culture means you have people who are set with the right skills to understand how to use that data, how to apply that data in the course of doing work. Because otherwise, we can spit out a lot of data, but if it's not in the hands of knowledge workers who are dedicated to using that data to be better at their jobs, then it is just more data that really isn't helping to add value.
Scott or Jeremy, you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I certainly, yeah, absolutely will jump in on that. Can't resonate more with what Tom went through, and some of the things that we started with here, and I've made sure to educate and inform our leadership. And when the request was, we need more data, and a lot of times, when they would ask questions like that, I wanted to make sure that they knew what they were asking for, in the sense of, again, giving out just raw data is one thing, but really making sense of it and either turning it into some type of information or the next level of analytics did require much of what was kind of being outlined by Tom, meaning that we've got to make sure we invest, and not only that, but there is emphasis around making sure the resources are there that does something with it. I do have a tendency to feel like that it's expected that there's something that you buy and you put it in place, you turn it on like a light switch, and it just works, right? And they don't have to do anything else. And I do think, and I'll get to this more later when we talk about it in more detail, but I do point the fingers back at IT many times and IT leaders, and I know there's quite a few probably on here listening that may disagree, but or they may agree. But I don't know that we communicate, or maybe in my past, I haven't had the leaders that really have tied the business need together with it appropriately so that they do fully understand what interaction you're going to have with that type of framework and model that is going to really rear what they're looking for. But it can't just be, hey, IT, turn something on for us, right? And so that's been a little bit of a continual challenge that we go through.
Thank you, Scott. And I think you bring up a very good point that speaks to governance. And I'll kind of punt that off to you, Jeremy, because a lot of times you hear that with organizations saying, IT did this. Does the business have a role in the governance of data? And is there an opportunity to help and eliminate some of those problems with IT, saying IT did this, IT did that? Because does business have a role in driving some of those functions and making sure that the optimum outcomes are achieved?
Most definitely. And, my experience working with smaller companies, one is a lot of times they'll treat IT almost as second-class citizens, which in today's age, you really can't. They really need to be elevated. And I mean, what we see a lot with smaller clinics, smaller companies is a lot of these are still run by the original owners. So they do a lot of things by gut. and they've been, very successful doing that. But then as their businesses has grown, as competition has increased, they really need to start looking into, what the data is saying, how they're running their business, can there other efficiencies that they're missing, what are their competitors doing? So they kind of need to have that paradigm shift from I can manage this business by my gut to I need to start understanding what's going on. I need a record of truth that's not going to lie to me because I'm the owner. And part of that is IT. It's IT knowing the systems. It's IT putting the data together. It's mapping it, and it's presenting that to them, saying, you think you were doing good, but if you look at the data here, it shows that our ROI on the last 8 projects that were launched isn't very good.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's a great segue into the next question I wanted to have, the discussion I want to have. If you look at over the past decade, especially in healthcare, there's been huge investments in infrastructure, in talent to try and advance the data agenda. Some organizations have done very well, some not so much. What are some of the issues? And I want to get back to you, Scott, because I think you started going down that path. What are some of those issues that you see? Is it leadership support that you've seen? What are some of the challenges? And in your case and your experiences, I know you've worked with many, many organizations helping set up IT infrastructure to enable organizations. What are some of the challenges that you've seen and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, and I think the big thing I kind of waded into it a little bit before, but it's really fully understanding what it means going into it. But I think more importantly, and I will give, especially to our leaders here at Mercy IC, that through a process of us revisiting it, we have set up a data governance committee. And that's been very helpful. We actually have physicians that attend that, which really, really helps because we get a better sense of what they're looking for. And I think where I'm going with that is that some of the challenges, again, rooted back to really connecting the dots between, hey, it's not just a shiny new sort of toy that IT is going to put in place, but it's got all the bells and whistles, of course, that you do need. But it's also tied back to how they really can understand how does it move the business, Mark, right? The benchmarks, the things that they're looking to do, decisions that they have to make on whether it's about expanding a service line, is it something about divesting a service line, adding growth, and how do you connect those pieces? And so I think where I go with that with some of the biggest challenges is one, really getting sort of the organization to fully understand and going through that process. Two, is the point that I was making with the governance group is that it's very key that you hear from the customer, right? And our customers are going to be those that are going to utilize it. Three is, then all of a sudden it starts getting momentum a little bit. And then here's what happens is that all of a sudden you get kind of pulled in multiple directions to say, hey, you've demonstrated that it can do this, but now I need you to go over and do this and that. And so again, governance is very important to keep the priorities of what we're really trying to target. And then also there are those that are still the naysayers. They will challenge the data. They will challenge, and again, I think it goes back to what Jeremy was saying. So some of that you have to overcome is you got to be spot on with making sure that your sources of truth do maintain that integrity. And that they can trust it. And so then again, you have to have what I would say your leadership from the finance side that validates that, whether it's from the GL side or from the human resources side. And once they kind of really are a part of that and they move and they validate and confidently will say, hey, this is what we can hang our hat on, then next thing is how fast can you get there? The last part I'll make is that some of the challenges is that they expect that and I think traditionally what we got hung up with is the time that it took to turn reports around, right? So you get a report and say it took, 2 to 3 weeks to get this report pulled together. And then they'd get the report. And by that time, the time that they needed a report has already changed 5 times. And they look at it and go, okay, this is great, but now I need 5 or 6 other pieces of data that would relate to really the decision we're trying to get to. And it just becomes a vicious cycle. So part of what we have to make sure we overcome with better technology, with data lakes, is empowering the end user, right? You got to be able to make it so that they can interact with this data and they can actually have an ability to take things that through guidelines we're able to prepare and produce as IT, but then gives them the autonomy and the empowered sort of sense that they can go in and then move that data around more on a real-time basis. So I would say these are the kind of things that were somewhat and are somewhat of a challenge, but also things you got to think about as you're moving forward.
Scott, I think you brought up some great points about data governance, as well as turnaround time on meeting some of those asks. I want to get to Scott in a little bit, but Jeremy, dovetailing into that, part of increasing some of those turnaround time is setting up the necessary infrastructure. So be it data warehouses, Scott spoke about data lakes. Can you expand a little bit on that as how you come in usually and help organizations so that we could take the governance structure and use it, leveraging some of those technologies and the infrastructure around it to really help speed up the turnaround time and smooth out the processes?
Yeah. So what we see a lot on our initial engagements is maybe it's only one or two data sources. And if that's the case, it's pretty easy just to connect directly to the database. And then you're looking at, very fast turnaround times for the data, as long as you have somebody there that understands what you're looking for. As an example, if somebody's looking for, like hours worked, but they don't know where in the database that lives, if you look into a database, there might be 800 tables that you're asking your BI developer to go in and find one column that says hours worked and that matches to what you're looking for. For like larger companies where you're talking about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different data sources, that's kind of where you see the benefits of a data lake, where you're taking all that data and then you're automatically dumping it into a dedicated server to kind of speed up the reporting process. Because across those 8, 9, 10 different sources, some of them might not have a direct connection. Some of them you might have to pull down daily flat files. Some of them you might have to use an API. And if you're trying to do that and you're trying to set up 8 or 9 or 10 of those, you're going to just constantly run into issues. So if you're able to automate the process and say every night, dump this spreadsheet into this folder, take that spreadsheet, load it into this predetermined table in my data lake, and then I have I have daily access to the most up-to-date data, then you're talking about decreasing the cycle time to actually get reports, and the reports are beneficial because you're not looking at data that's 2, 3, 4 weeks old.
Thank you, Jeremy. So I want to take the next question to Tom. Tom, Jeremy just spoke about how he and his organization helps their clients migrate over to the top right of the analytics maturity model, going from basic just discovery, trying to find out what happened, advancing your capabilities all the way to the top, the pinnacle of analytics, which is predictive and prescriptive analytics. Can you speak a little bit to that? What are some of the obstacles in accelerating AI and data automation?
Yeah, well, great question and great dialogue before that sets the stage. So if we presume an organization has hired great talent when it comes to CTOs or data science or analytical people, and they have that covered, that's the base of the foundation. More importantly, driving value, particularly when you are introducing artificial intelligence, comes back to that leadership imperative, where the first thing to recognize is you can create a data culture, but the introduction of AI totally changes when you move from that look in the rearview mirror analytics to predicting, and then if you can predict, you can prescribe behaviors. And what that looks like is, if there's anything else you remember in what I say on this panel today, it's AI adds value to any organization in one of two ways. It either automates work done by humans or it augments work done by humans. So in that regard, it's everyone's responsibility to be looking at things like those things that are automated are typically highly repetitive activities that doesn't require a lot of problem solving. So in healthcare, that could be food service workers, it could be housekeepers. And so some of those jobs, frankly, are going to be automated out of existence. And in that regard, we need to be mindful of what that looks like and the implications if you're an employer. The majority of the work, at least in healthcare, though, is done by knowledge workers, which means that the way in which a doctor, a nurse, a rev cycle specialist works is going to change. And with that comes, again, expertise in things like process improvement, a focus on HR specialists, really be looking at everything from skilling and reskilling of your current workforce to implications for who and how you're recruiting. And finally, and maybe we can touch on this sometime before we end, when we start looking at advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, culture is important, but if you look at the data, AI has a diversity issue when it comes to who are going into those jobs, who are getting the kind of degrees that will drive the future of analytics and AI.
No, those are some great points. Scott, you touched on AI and data automation, and I think from my perspective, the more the data, the better you do. And in healthcare, we're blessed with a lot of data. Unfortunately, it's also a curse, right? Because the more data you have, the more you have to worry about securing it. You have data quality concerns, access, all those things. Scott, can you take that question on with regards to how do you get around this within your organization, making sure that you're handling huge amounts of data and then making sure that you're balancing the data security, access, and really quality across the data continuum, because you have so many different people in the lifespan of the data. People entering the data at the point of care in healthcare, people transforming the data at some point, that's your analysts, and then your consumers. And your consumers mostly come in two different categories. You've got your strategic folks and your operational folks. How do you balance that? Because I think that's a big part of creating a data culture, managing data through the life cycle.
Yeah, I think that, and again, I think it's depending on the size of your organization, the way you would approach that, at least from my perspective and what I've done in the past, is one is, of course, we look at how we internally can secure those things and put in provisioning processes and none of that, but we have a structure around who really has what role in maintaining and controlling that data. And interestingly, and here's an interesting question for everyone that's on this call right now. And I think, when we were all talking before, I brought it up, and it's like the biggest question typically comes up is who owns the data? And it's interesting when you ask that question, and whether it's in your governance or at your executive leadership level, they all kind of like look around the table because they're not quite sure what that means, right? And so anyway, it kind of begins there, right? And you have to kind of figure out, well, where does that begin, and the policies and the processes that you put around it. But as I kind of wanted to go down two roads real quick, and I'll try to be very brief on this, is that one, if much larger companies have a tendency to have things that maybe more on-prem, it may be a hybrid type cloud sort of infrastructure that you have, and I think that a lot of that you have to certainly leverage and make sure you put the right framework and wrappers around that data, and then most importantly, your identity access management role-based type securities you put in place certainly has to make sure that those who have the right and the need to get to that data can do so. I'm actually moved from a larger organization. This is a smaller organization, and we don't typically have necessarily that, I think, more, I'd say, I wouldn't say luxury, but I guess, you have less sort of resources that have to do more. So then it can actually become a little more complex in the sense that you do have people wearing multiple hats, and then you have to have some controls around that. But that's where I think, and the reason why I've reached out to Advanced Business Solutions to help us with that is to bring to the table a couple of things. One is some proven infrastructure and security mechanisms that we can leverage from things that they've already done, and that's proven, and we don't have to necessarily reinvent that or take that and internalize it. We can just sort of plug into it. Secondly, is that using some of the more advanced things such with Azure or Google or AWS, and making sure that you have a good agreements around where your data sits there. It's very difficult, especially in healthcare, to well, I shouldn't say especially in healthcare. I should just say in healthcare, because that's what I know the most. Is that being able to try to keep up with what it takes to really be that top tier in securing data without the help of your vendor partners and probably your bigger vendor partners such as Microsoft or Google, even groups like ABS or others. So I bounced around on a few things there, but it's kind of approaching it depending on your organization and size. But I think all of those latter things I talked about are very important to how you manage that data and keep it structured and keep it protected. A lot of it is intuitive and it's very fundamental, but I think a lot of times we kind of forget, especially as we do start building what I would say that strategy around a data-driven culture.
Thank you, Scott. I think transforming from department-owned data sets to enterprise-wide data is very important. I'm glad you underscored that. Scott, partnerships, are they important in building a data culture?
They are. I kind of tapped on that a little bit, but again, I guess it depends on, sort of, and Tom kind of hit this a little bit earlier, is if you can, organization is got the ability to go and bring in and internalize data scientists, data miners, and build that full sort of group around, then I could see where maybe there's more of a hybrid with how you do that. But for groups like us, I mean, we still have to have a little bit of that internal, but I have to depend a lot on the vendor partnerships. And I do really mean the partnerships, right? I can't just have willy-nilly vendor relationships that are piecemealing things together, but they have to be invested in knowing my strategy. They have to be a part of helping build that strategy. They have to work with other vendor partners. And I'm going to tell you that sometimes for many of those probably listening right now can be a challenge, when you've got vendor partners that perhaps their services and what they do may cross over each other. And you have to really put good, boundaries around, look, I need you to stay in this work lane and you stay in this work lane. But when you do it well, and everybody is at the table and helps drive it, it becomes a very powerful model, and it really moves things quickly. So
do you ever emphasize partnerships with internal constituents as well within your organization? Are those important as well?
Yeah, just like we we kind of somebody was talking about this a little bit earlier, but one of the big changes is that all the departments that have had something to do with controlling of data in more of a disparate or disjointed model, you start moving in this direction. And it feels like you're taking something away from them, right? Like they're going to lose their job, or and maybe it is going to get somewhat repurposed, or it could be that part of what we're doing is going to reorganize that to some degree. But you will have some of that resistance. You may have some of that speculation, or even some of that sort of roadblocking. And so you have to partner with the various leaders in these departments that fully understand and are part of the governance, they're part of the strategy. I think it goes back to where we fundamentally started talking about it's more than just IT turning on a bunch of bells and whistles and lights and things flashing. They have to understand what it's going to take to move this mark. And then they got to see some stuff, right? So I think it's important, like where I'm at right now. Interestingly, I was in a meeting yesterday, and comes up every time. It's like, hey, you gave us this before, but what have you done for me lately? They're getting a good sort of taste and feel of it, and they're seeing how easy it is to review and utilize, and they want more. So again, governance.
No, thank you for that. So in healthcare, just shifting focus a little bit, in healthcare, we like to say we are patient-centered. Everything we do is to care for and provide care for patients. Now, the big emphasis these days is data-driven culture. So Jeremy, is a data-driven culture? Does that go against the grain of the messaging around the focus on patients?
Well, that's a good question. I think context matters because behind every patient-driven reporting and KPI or key performance indicator, there are real live patients. So you can't lose sight of that. And I think the idea is if you're managing to a patient-focused KPI, which does kind of separate the patient from that value, hopefully that is resulting in an improved experience for the patient. If you're reducing if you're reducing the time for a patient to leave, hopefully that's good. And it's not just, you're not just focused on freeing up a bed. It's, no, we got this patient in faster, we processed them faster, we got them care faster, and we checked all the boxes and said, hey, you're good to go. And then that's obviously a better experience for them because nobody wants to be, in a hospital any longer than they have to be. So, being data-driven also helps when you have industry benchmarks. If you have access to industry benchmarks and you have accurate data on your own business, you can kind of see where you are and maybe where you're falling down and maybe where you're not following, best practices, and that also kind of gives you something to shoot for.
Hey, Tawanda, can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Scott.
I'm sorry, and I don't want to take up everyone's, but I think that's great, Jeremy. And then the other side of what I am seeing, and again, many that may be joining if they're in healthcare can either agree or maybe contest on this, but our patients are becoming very savvy around data, and data meaning they know that we are collecting this data. They know that it needs to be protected. They like to hear that things are being driven to evidence-based, right? They ask these questions. I mean, and it's not just the Gen Zs or X or millennials. I mean, these are folks also that go into the other generations that will ask these questions. They're very curious about it. They know that they've been educated perhaps by their younger groups that's around them, and they do ask those questions. And it's interesting how they do approach that, and they want to know what does this mean for them, and are they getting the best care through data and best practice.
Hey, Tawanda, this is Tom. Can I hijack this before you ask the next question? So I'm going to build on what Jeremy and Scott said and take it maybe one level higher. So, as we talk about data culture, we're very focused on, like we're talking about healthcare now, how we use data inside the garden walls of providing care in the hospital, the clinic. But I think taking Scott's point one step farther, they're not only interested, but there's a growing movement to say, how do we extend the ability to have them actively participating in their own health and medical care management by providing them with access to data? And whether that's, things that they're getting through their smart apps, things they can take and do self-reporting and then apply that to some other data that hospitals have. But I think we've reached a point, and I think COVID in the last year has taught us several things, and that includes we have better ways of getting care out in the community delivered virtually. And as that happened, there's a large and growing number of consumers that liked it. They want more. And part of our data culture needs to be looking at not just controlling that data to provide care, but actually bringing our consumers in and making data part of that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think one of the things, I'll ask one more question, and then maybe we can take some questions from the audience. I think just to provide context, I'm born and raised in Zimbabwe. I came to America in '98. One of the first things I did was go to a bank, get an ATM card, and it was a Chase Bank, and I could go to Bank of America and take money out. In healthcare, we are just now getting to the point where we have good interoperability. Tom, I want to start off with you, and all the other folks can, Jeremy and Scott can chime in. Why do we see a lag with healthcare investing in technology compared to other industries like banking, real estate, where some of the technology and the data-driven processes are much more mature?
Boy, we could take a whole hour to answer that one. I think the short answer is one, healthcare is in fact investing heavily in technology and data-driven technology. The question is how they're investing, how it's being used. If you look closely at any major medical system, particularly in America, we have massive amounts of money being invested, but much of those investments are to create deeper silos of data, electronic medical records, imaging, administrative. So the first thing is we've got all this data stuck in silos that it's like a treasure chest. How do we unlock that to do good? The second thing, to your point of banks versus healthcare, every major medical center that I know of always have a patient portal, and you have the ability to do certain things and get data out. But if you go and say, I want to take all of that and I'm moving from Seattle to Houston, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to have that follow you. That is less a technical issue and more of a competitive issue within the provider world where, organizations like to keep all that data in what I call inside the garden wall, in some ways for business purposes, but it's less the inability technically and more it's just how healthcare is operated up till now.
Scott, as a follow-up to that, is it important for healthcare organizations to bust that bubble, I guess, where we have all these different silos? Because I think, again, to a point from earlier, for us to really advance automation and AI, the more data, the better. I know each organization has a lot of data, but what is that important that we figure out the interoperability and data exchanges?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely critical, and we've got to. And my disclaimer is this is Scott Alderman. I don't, reflect necessarily the opinions of Mercy IC, but maybe perhaps in an aggregate of all of healthcare. I've been in healthcare nearly 30 years, but to that point, it's a couple things. When we are investing a lot, I think that in fact to the point where a lot of CEOs is going, holy moly, we're investing a lot of money, but I'm not quite seeing that differentiator, right? We're not seeing where we are doing the kind of things that like the banking industry, the manufacturing industry, the retail industry, and how it's interacting with its customer. It's still, and I don't mean this because I think there are some healthcare systems that are really being innovated and doing a great job with this. So again, I'm just speaking from some of the things I'm seeing, and I think there's still quite a bit of healthcare groups out there that are still kind of lagging in this. But I think it goes to where yes, we are investing, but it goes right back to fundamentally what we were talking about before. I don't know that IT leaders are doing the right things and making sure that they are getting that governance together. They're bringing that strategy together. They're explaining it and making sure that they're involving the other leaders in the organization and partnering with them and making sure that they are part of that strategy, right? And understanding how that's going to move the mark. And then there is some this weird kind of other still traditional kind of thinking that's out there that we're healthcare and it's I think it was actually explained to me one time by a physician that said, you IT people are taking the art of medicine away from me. So there's this kind of sense of where they think that, and the same person made a comment and said, I feel like I work for an IT company that happens to do healthcare. Well, that's the wrong sort of way of what hopefully we're trying to achieve here, right? And so when we do try to present some of the other innovative thinking, you kind of get this sense of like, what is the IT person doing telling us how to drive healthcare? And so again, we've got to get better at being a leader and being a real administrative, being part of the administration and really understanding the part of how it ties into delivering better patient care. And so anyway, I think there's a myriad of things that are going on there. I think it is changing to some degree, not as fast as I'd like to see it. It still feels like that, there's still kind of some skepticism about, when you have leaders that actually, when you ask the question, do you believe there's an ROI in the EHR? And they go, no. We got a fundamental miss, right? We got a problem where people are not connecting how technology is improving that and helping us move the mark. So anyway, I don't want to keep going on and on, but I think there's myriads of things there that need to be shored up. But I think we are moving in that direction, just not very fast.
No, thank you, Scott. I'm looking at the time here. I think we've got right at about 17 minutes. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience, see if we could get some questions, and we'll see if one of the panelists can answer your questions. Looks like we've got Evan. Can we bring Evan up?
Yeah, there were a few questions in the chat too, just in case somebody's watching that.
Okay. I'm looking at the chat now. Eric, are we able to bring Evan up so he can ask his question?
Evan, if you can help me.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
We hear several people, but is that you, Eric?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You're good, Evan.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a data science intern at White Clay. It's a financial technology firm. And a lot of the, I guess, disconnect we run into in trying to make data, or one of the challenges, I guess, that we run into is trying to connect back-end people like me with front-end people that are actually going to display the data. How can front-end developers and back-end developers work together, I guess, in a more efficient or better way to make sure that data is accessible, like you said, so that they don't have to continue to have one-off solutions, that we can build solutions that they can interact with the data more fully?
So I can hop in there because that's actually something that we've been doing. I mean, at the end of the day, for our ultimate goal is to get a lot of these organizations what we call self-service BI, where we're not creating reports for them. We're just giving them the tools to say, go ahead and create, kind of whatever report you're interested in doing. But again, when you look at the typical table structure for an application, there's hundreds of tables comprising thousands of columns, and they only need 3 or 4 tables and a dozen columns. So, I mean, part of the job at the back end is to understand the mapping of what's really important, and then making just the important data available to them. So somebody that wants to go in and see a patient count or a turnover rate doesn't have to swim through, they don't have to, they find the signal within the noise, and they're not swimming through all this data for something, and then they just throw their hands up and say, no, I just need a report writer to figure it out for me. So you kind of want to empower the people that know the business best, give them the tools and access to the data where they can just say, this is what I want to see. Okay, all these fields look familiar. I know what I'm doing. Here's the report I want. Great. Because you don't want to have a report writer create half a dozen reports that get read once, and then they're constantly updating them, and it's just shouting into the void.
Hey, this is Tom. If I can jump in. First of all, great question. And within that, there are many issues. My first thing would be, I'd be really curious if you're, on the data science side, or you're an analyst or developer, and somehow you're, you're behind some other wall, not directly interacting with those who will use what you're doing. I'd say, you may have a process issue where so often, what's happened before is smart programmers program, but they've never walked in the shoes of a floor nurse, a physician making rounds who has to sign into 4 or 5 different systems to get information. So, the best way of doing things going forward is always that user-centric design and design principles, where if you talk to physicians and ask them how they like their EMR, you usually get some responses that are not effusively positive. But if you drill into why, it's typically because the systems they're dealing with do not take into account what it's like to be a physician in the real world of making rounds, of going to their office and doing all those things. So the ability to partner you and your talents with the end users you're trying to serve to create those design schema from the beginning really is at the heart of how we make things better.
Thank you for that, Tom. I think John had a question in the chat box that says, what is the role of all these in consumer experience? So when you look at consumerism, does data have a role? Anyone want to field that one?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, yeah, it's 100% they do. In fact, I think we kind of hit on it a little bit with the fact that our consumers, so our patients, but I mean, they're consumers too, right? They're doing other things with us. They want access to that. Tom hit on it very, very well in the sense that not only is it that they're very aware that this data is there and that they want to interact with, that they demand it, and they want to. In fact, the more and more we have regulatory changes that says we have to do pricing transparency, right? And we have to start providing what the cost of healthcare is out there. And that's very tricky. And I kind of hear both sides of it and I understand it. But at the end of the day, customers are going to be able to have it. I mean, they have a choice, right? And they need to know, what is it that's available to me? What kind of time frames are we looking at? What type of surgeries? What does the surgery entail? The drugs? I mean, it's everything, right? It's everything that you would want to know about your care. And they need to be able to get to that through any mechanism, ubiquitously, right? Through smartphones and portals and other things. So yeah, I think it's absolutely key. And it is a huge differentiator, in my opinion, between hospitals or healthcare systems that do it well and they thrive versus those that are going to struggle.
So if I could jump in on that one, and to be a shameless self-promoter, my new book last year was about AI in health, but the main focus was the emergence of what I call intelligent health systems. To Scott's point, consumers are increasingly not only demanding, but they're extremely frustrated with the way traditional healthcare works today. There was a study last year by Change Healthcare that said finding, accessing, and paying for healthcare requires so much work that half of all consumers just avoid seeking care altogether. So as we talk about data and consumerism, some of it's making healthcare better, but much of it is just making the patient experience so much easier. And that's where things like data and AI for the smart organizations, not the traditional health systems, but the ones that move towards becoming intelligent health systems, they're going to figure out how to use this to improve that experience across all channels, experiences, and touch points. And those that get it right are the ones that will win in the future market. And those that stick to what they're doing will likely not have a good future.
Amen to that.
No, that's a good point. We had a question in the chat that speaks, I think, to prioritization. In a world of limited resources, not everything will be done. How are you balancing? I'll direct this one to you, Scott. When you have all these requests that come through for data or some type of analytics, how do you balance what gets worked on? Ultimately, it speaks to alignment with your organizational mission and goals. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's governance. I mean, it's I don't want to be the IT guy sitting there directing what's going to get done and what's not going to get done from that perspective. It's where we've got representation from all disciplines in the healthcare system that represent their need. And so we have an ingestion and intake process, where people can say, hey, I want this. And we review that with the governance and we make sure that it aligns to the other strategies that are going on, because I will tell you that when you start doing it, one of the things ABS has done well for us, they've got, someone that I really appreciate and like what he's done for us, pulling, a multitude of just standalone warehouses into a data lake. And he's already demonstrated the power of it, and it has opened the floodgate. People are just asking for this and asking for that. And so governance has to be in place, and it has to participate in prioritizing.
No, thank you, Scott. I want to take two more questions from the audience. Then I'll ask each of our panelists to give us closing remarks. I think, Scott, I'd be remiss if I don't add to that, because I think the importance of governance is the distinction between you being successful or not. And even above and beyond just IT governance, it's organizational governance. Every organization has their priorities outlined, either be it strategically for the next 3, 4, 5 years, or every year you have your strategic initiatives. ultimately, to the question, I think in the chat box, you want to make sure that those priorities are cascaded to your IT teams, they're cascaded to your analysts, your business units, everyone doing the analysis. And that's how they need to prioritize what gets worked on, making sure that anything and everything that aligns with the priorities for the year is addressed and is in the top tier of what will be worked on.
Yeah, I'll add one more thought to that, and I know we're closing up, but I think it's important that, and the other thing that those that are going to go down, and to initiate or help drive that sort of strategy, I just want to, because there is always the befuddlement between legacy or what we call bimodal, the part of either your half, one foot's in legacy, the other foot is in the new, and you got to be very keen on staying very disciplined and focused on where you're moving to. And that may mean that some things might have to slow down a little bit. And as long as you give them, though, that understanding of where it will go to eventually be more efficient, they'll be with you. But I will tell you, that's a tough one to deal with.
All right, do we have any more questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand. All right, it looks like we are right at 8 after, so I'll give each one of our panelists 2 minutes to kind of give us their closing remarks, and then we can say our goodbyes. So we'll start with you, Tom. Is that okay?
That's great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and convening this
Tom,
forum.
I want to put you on the spot. Can you speak a little bit about your book and what you have in there? I took a look and I was pretty impressed.
Well, thank you. Anyone in healthcare is likely familiar with an organization called HIMSS, which is the largest health IT organization in the world. So they came to me a while back and said, we have many, many books on AI from a technical perspective. We have nothing for use by health and business and clinical leaders on what it is and how to basically bring it into a health organization and drive value at scale. So HIMSS published this book last March, and it is my attempt to at least take all of the learnings I have as a strategic advisor to executives and clinical leaders and instill it down to many of the issues we've been talking about today around what it is, how to apply it. There was a question earlier about how to drive this through the organization, and those are all the issues that relate to leadership, that relate to engaging all of your employees from the get-go rather than tossing it over the wall to your smart technologist. So it really is about everything from culture to looking at how AI can do a lot of good, but if we're not careful, it can also do a lot of harm. And that's where things like I'm talking a lot right now about the hot topic of what I call responsible AI, where you can use AI, it's legal, it's regulatorily compliant, but it serves the needs of some patients and minimizes or is biased towards serving the needs of all. So it's a book that brings all of that together. If you're not a technologist, it's written for you. If you are a technologist, it's probably still useful. But thanks for asking.
All right, thanks a lot. We will move on to Jeremy, your closing remarks.
All right, and thanks again for moderating this. This was great. I guess I'm just going to kind of close with the importance of senior leadership's buy-in on this, and I'll kind of end with a little story. One of the first data projects I was ever on, we were building a very large KPI dashboard for a Fortune 500 company. The person spearheading that used to be the head of the BI group for a very large call center. And he had told us a story about how they were generating hundreds of reports a day, but they never knew what was going on with them. So he told his report writers, delay all your reports for a day. And then a week later, he's like, send the wrong reports. And then a week later, he's like, don't send any reports. And nobody raised the flag saying, hey, we didn't get our reports. So it also kind of goes into like the data culture as well. If you're just report writing just for report writing and you're not getting any benefit from it, then you're wasting somebody's time. So senior leadership needs to take that stand to say, Data is important, information is important. Putting that information to use is very important. Let's not just report write for report writing's sake.
Thank you, Jeremy. Scott, just your closing remarks?
Yeah, I think for me, it's those of you that are out there, thinking, well, how do I take this? And I know I've said in many of these before, and you walk away and you're kind of like, well, there was a lot said, and some of it was intuitive, and some of it was very kind of just stating the obvious. We hope that we provided some information around the tactics of what you can do, but I will leave with certainly a little higher level in the sense that I think this sort of strategy is as important as and correlates with, you have to have your infrastructure solid, right? You have to have your security solid. And then you've got the other things that are going on, whether it's your other major type systems, and then data and the data lake, the data management, however you want to coin what that that sort of models out is that other part that is very critical to your organization, and then healthcare, and I think in any other industries, it's what's going to make the difference in your competition, and how well you do it, and how much you are able to take that and remove the complexity. I use that a lot when I'm talking to leadership in the teams. Is IT is not going to get less complicated. It's going to get more complicated, but our job is to make it appear that it's less complex. You have to do that, or else they will just glaze over and they won't use it, or they'll just sort of support you, but it'll just kind of die on the vine. It won't go anywhere. You got to get them energized. You got to show them how easy it is for them to use and how valuable it is. And once you do that, it will grow on its own. And in fact, they'll eventually say, we don't want you to lead that anymore. Let's let these other people lead it. And that's exactly where you want to be. So anyway, I'll just leave it with that.
No, thank you very much, Scott, Tom, and Jeremy for being on the panel. And thanks to Microsoft and Future of Work Initiatives for hosting this panel. I guess to end, I'll just end with a statement that's really close and dear to my heart. As a Black man working in IT, pseudo IT, I'm more on the business side. I think the biggest thing I see is our data carries some of the biases that are out there. One of the charges I always tell people is look to be a good steward of the community. One of the biggest things we have is equity. If you're training, especially your AI models, be mindful of the data and how you could limit carrying biases in the final product. I think we're all aware of some of those challenges. I look forward to advancing AI in healthcare. And thank you all for joining today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.